The Duke followed his maid one evening. Certain she was a thief, the truth broke him. He told himself he was being vigilant. That was the word he used, standing in the shadow of the east corridor, watching the candlelight flicker beneath her door at 11:30. Vigilant. It was the word of a responsible landowner, a man who had every right to know what happened beneath the roof of Ashworth Hall. Not suspicious. Not obsessive. Not the sort of man who had begun memoizing the sound of a servant girl's footsteps on the flagstone, who could distinguish her tread from the 12 other women in his household by the slight pause she always made at the third stair. He told himself that, and almost believed it. Her name was Clara Voss. She had arrived at Ashworth Hall 6 weeks ago, hired on as a lady's maid following the abrupt departure of his late wife's companion, a departure he had neither requested nor particularly mourned. Clara came with excellent references from a household in Bath, spoke with the contained precision of someone who had learned to make herself small, and did not flinch when the housekeeper, Mrs. Peel, delivered the customary lecture about the Duke's particular requirements regarding discretion, punctuality, and the correct placement of objects on his late wife's writing desk. She had not flinched. That was the first thing he'd noticed. The second was that she had begun disappearing. Not dramatically. Not in ways that anyone else would have catalogued. But Edmund Ashworth, the 6th Duke of Ashworth, had spent 11 years learning to notice what others missed. It had been a survival skill in Parliament, and it had served him less well in his personal life, because it meant he noticed everything, including things he was not meant to. He noticed that Clara Voss took her half-day on Wednesdays, as she was entitled to, but spent those afternoons not in the village, where the other maids went to walk, gossip, and spend their shillings, but in the house, in the small linen room off the east corridor, where the sound of writing could be heard if you happened to pass. He noticed that she declined the servants' quarterly gathering at the village tavern. He noticed that she sometimes came to breakfast with her eyes faintly reddened, not from weeping but from sleeplessness, the particular hollowness of someone who has spent hours with a candle rather than a pillow. And twice now, on nights with no pattern he could yet identify, he had heard the servants' entrance close well past midnight, not open, but close, the sound of someone returning. And he had noticed, 3 days ago, that a small piece of silver had gone missing from the second-floor parlor. It was nothing significant. A card tray, ornate but not irreplaceable, one of dozens of such objects that accumulated in great houses the way debt accumulated in great families, silently, over generations, until one day you looked around and realized you could not see the walls for the clutter. It had been missing since at least Thursday. One of the housemaids had noticed the empty shelf while dusting on Friday and reported it to Mrs. Peel, who had filed the official record on Monday. Edmund had said he would look into it himself. He had not explained why. What he had not said, what he had told no one, was that he had already looked. He had gone through every room on the second floor himself, quietly, before the household was properly awake on Tuesday morning. The tray was not mislaid. It was gone. And because his attention had been sharpening around Clara Voss for 6 weeks, her name had arrived at the front of his mind without his permission, and he had not been able to dislodge it. This meant that when he followed her into the night and watched her press the tray into Thomas's palm, she had been carrying it concealed for several days, walking past him at breakfast, dressing her mistress's hair, delivering the evening post, with that small silver secret folded inside her cloak. He did not know this yet. He would, in the morning, and it would make the whole picture at once worse and more comprehensible. So now he stood in the east corridor at 11:30, watching her light, and told himself he was being vigilant. Her door opened. He pressed himself against the wall, a ridiculous gesture, ducal and undignified, a man of 41 years flattening himself against his own wallpaper like a boy playing at spies. But she did not look toward the corridor. She looked down the stairs. She was dressed, not in her nightclothes, but in her outdoor dress, dark wool, with a cloak over her arm. In her other hand she carried a small cloth bag. She wore no hat. Her dark hair was pinned back with the efficiency of someone who had done it in the dark. Edmund waited until she reached the bottom of the stairs before he followed. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got here. Let me tell you about the 6 weeks before that night, about the things a duke does not allow himself to see until it is too late to pretend he has not seen them, and about a young woman carrying a secret so heavy it had become the whole architecture of her life. Let me tell you about Clara Voss. She had come to Ashworth Hall on a Tuesday, which she would later say was an omen. She had never had good luck on Tuesdays. She had stood in the servants' entrance with her single trunk and her folded references and the particular expression of someone who knows they are being assessed and has decided not to perform for the assessment. Mrs. Peel had circled her like a general reviewing uncertain troops. "You are younger than I expected," Mrs. Peel had said. "I am 24, Clara had replied, "which is the age stated in my correspondence." A brief silence. "You are very direct. I was told the household values precision." Mrs. Peel had made a sound that was not quite approval. "His Grace values it. The rest of us have learned to live with it." Clara had been shown to her room, small, clean, a window that looked onto the kitchen garden, and had sat on the edge of the narrow bed with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the middle distance for exactly 3 minutes. Anyone watching would have seen a young woman composing herself after a journey. Anyone watching very closely might have noticed that her composure was not the ease of a rested person, but the discipline of someone who had learned to pack grief into a very small space and carry it without visible strain. Then she had stood, unpacked her trunk with methodical efficiency, and gone downstairs to begin work. She met the Duke that evening. He was in the library, a room that had the particular character of a space actually used rather than merely maintained. Books pulled from shelves and not replaced, 3 different half-read volumes bookmarked on the desk, a coat draped over the wrong chair. He was standing at the window when she entered to deliver the evening post, and he turned with the instinctive alertness of a man who did not like being surprised, even in his own house. Clara had seen portraits of him. His reputation preceded him in the way that great houses' reputations preceded them, known from a distance, assembled from other people's words. The 6th Duke of Ashworth, widower, former parliamentary man, known for intelligence and a temper that ran cold rather than hot, which was, people agreed, more frightening. The portraits had given him grey at the temples and a jaw like a closing door. The portraits had been accurate, as far as they went. What they had not captured, what portraits rarely did, was the quality of his stillness, the sense of a man who had decided, at some point, to go very quiet and stay that way. She recognized him, of course. She simply had not expected to find that recognition unsettling. "You are the new lady's maid," he said. "Yes, Your Grace. Clara Voss." He studied her for a moment with the particular assessment of someone who is also accustomed to being assessed, and finding he could not immediately categorize her, filed her into a category marked wait and see. "You have no objection to long hours," he said. It was not a question. "None, Your Grace. And you understand that this household does not encourage familiarity." "I understood that from the advertisement." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. "Good. That will be all, Miss Voss." She left. He returned to the window. And if he stood there slightly longer than the occasion warranted, watching the kitchen garden where nothing at all was happening, it was simply because he was thinking about Parliament. That was what he told himself. The first 3 weeks were ordinary. Or rather, they appeared ordinary, which is a different thing. Clara performed her duties with a quiet competence that Mrs. Peel grudgingly admired and the other staff found slightly unnerving. She was pleasant but not chatty, helpful but not intrusive, the sort of person who occupied exactly the space they were given and no more. She pressed gowns. She dressed hair. She carried messages. She was never late. She also, every Wednesday afternoon without fail, used her half-day not in the village but in the small linen room off the east corridor, a room no one else had cause to enter, where the door was kept almost shut and the sound of writing, if you passed at the right moment, was unmistakable. Once, one of the younger maids, Kitty, who was 17 and interested in everything, had knocked to see if she wanted company. Clara had opened the door just wide enough to speak. "Thank you, Kitty. I prefer quiet on my afternoons." Kitty had reported this as strange. The senior staff had reported it as commendable. The Duke, who had heard neither report but had developed, without consciously intending to, a fairly complete picture of Clara Voss's movements, had noticed it and added it to the accumulating catalogue. He confirmed what she was doing on a Wednesday afternoon in the 4th week, by accident. He had not intended to be in the East Corridor at 3 o'clock. He had been going to his study by a circuitous route, avoiding the West Passage where 2 footmen were carrying furniture for a rearrangement he had not requested but was too tired to countermand. He passed the door of the small linen room that Clara had apparently been using as a writing space. The door was slightly ajar, the way a door is left when someone is not expecting to be interrupted. He heard paper. Not the rustle of clothing, not the quiet movement of tidying. The deliberate, absorbed sound of someone writing fast. He stopped. He was aware that stopping was not something he should be doing. He was also aware that he had, in recent weeks, become very interested in the things Clara Voss did not want him to know, and that this interest had the particular quality of something that had started as professional suspicion and had become, without his permission, something else entirely. He walked on. He did not look through the door. But he had seen, in the 2 seconds it took to walk past, the edge of the desk, a spread of papers, a small cloth bundle tied with string, and Clara's hand moving across a page with the speed and certainty of someone who wrote like they breathed, not composing, but transcribing, pouring something out. The cloth bundle had the look of food wrapped for a journey. The letters, he would later understand, went through the workhouse post. The food and small necessities were saved for the other kind of meeting. The unscheduled nights when word somehow reached her that Thomas had managed the 12 miles from Millbridge on foot and was waiting at the wood's edge. Those nights could not be predicted. She could only keep herself ready for them. "Mrs. Peel," he said, 2 days later, in the formal tone he used when he wanted information without wanting to seem to want it. "Has Miss Voss settled satisfactorily?" Mrs. Peel, who had survived 3 previous dukes and was not deceived by formal tones, permitted herself no expression. "Satisfactorily, Your Grace. She is diligent and causes no trouble. And her background, the family in Bath was adequate. Exemplary. The lady of the house wrote her reference personally, which is unusual. He was looking at the ledger on his desk, which he was not reading. And her family. She has connections in the county." A pause so brief it was almost imperceptible. "I believe she has a brother, Your Grace. I don't believe she's mentioned him." He looked up. "She hasn't spoken of family. She speaks very little of personal matters. I assumed it was a virtue." It was a statement with an edge in it, the edge of a woman telling a duke to leave well enough alone. Edmund heard it, acknowledged it internally, and set it aside. "Of course," he said. "Thank you, Mrs. Peel." The silver card tray was reported missing on a Monday. Edmund heard the report and did not immediately believe Clara was responsible. This surprised him. He was, by habit, a man who followed evidence, and the evidence was circumstantial but present. She was new, she was secretive, she came and went on a schedule no one quite understood. Any reasonable employer would have placed her at the top of a short list of suspects. He did not believe she had taken it. This was the moment. Had he been the self-examining sort, which he was not, or not until recently, that he should have stopped and questioned the nature of his disbelief. Disbelief, in his experience, came in 2 flavors: the cold kind, rooted in evidence that contradicted the theory, and the warm kind, rooted in not wanting the theory to be true. He did not have cold evidence of her innocence. He had the warm kind. He had 6 weeks of watching someone work with a meticulous honesty that expressed itself in small, unobserved ways. The way she returned exact change when sent on errands, the way she corrected Mrs. Peel's inventory records without being asked, the way she never, not once, helped herself to the small luxuries that servants in great houses were implicitly permitted to ignore. He did not believe Clara Voss was a thief. But he stationed himself in the East Corridor at 11:30 and watched her door, because he had run out of legitimate reasons to think about her and had settled, as men sometimes do, for illegitimate ones. He followed her through the servants' entrance and into the night. The Ashworth grounds were large, and at 11 at night in October they had the quality of somewhere between estate and wilderness. The formal gardens dissolved into meadow. The meadow gave way to the woods that bordered the eastern edge of the property. Clara walked with a purpose that suggested she knew exactly where she was going, her cloak pulled close, the cloth bag held against her side. Edmund kept his distance. He was wearing dark wool, not deliberately, simply what he'd been wearing that evening, and the cloud cover was thick enough to muffle the moon. He moved with more stealth than he had any right to expect from a man of his height and the general unyieldingness of his character, driven by something he was still, even now, calling vigilance. She stopped at the edge of the woods. There was a figure there, waiting. Edmund's jaw set. A man. That was his first, sharp impression. Then the figure resolved in the darkness and he understood, not a man. A boy. 14, perhaps 15, slight-shouldered and pale, wearing a coat too large for him. The boy moved toward Clara with the particular unsteady gait of someone who had been standing still too long in the cold, and she reached out and caught him before he could stumble, and held on. Edmund stopped. He was 20 feet away, sheltered by a stand of bare oak, close enough to see but not to hear. He watched Clara hold this boy with the specific, fierce tenderness of someone for whom this was the most important thing they did, the thing everything else was arranged around. The boy had his face turned into her shoulder. His hands were fisted in her cloak. After a moment she drew back and looked at him, assessing him, the way a person looks at someone they are frightened for. And then she opened the cloth bag and took out a folded cloth, which Edmund now understood had held food, and a small sealed package, and a book. She pressed the book into the boy's hands. Even at 20 feet, in near darkness, Edmund could see the boy shake his head. Clara said something. He could not hear the words, but he could hear the cadence, low and firm and urgent, the voice of someone not arguing but insisting. The boy shook his head again. She pressed the book more firmly. He took it. Then she reached into her cloak and removed something small, and placed it in the boy's palm. Edmund recognized it at once. Even from 20 feet, even in the dark, he had spent 30 years in a house full of that particular silver, and he knew the shape. Then Clara reached up and put her palm against the boy's cheek, a gesture so private and so full that Edmund found himself looking away, and in looking away understood something he had been refusing to understand for 6 weeks. He went back to the house before she did. He sat in the library for 2 hours, not reading, with a glass of brandy he did not finish, and when he heard her come in through the servant's entrance he sat very still and listened to her footsteps on the stairs, the slight pause at the third step, the soft close of her door. In the morning, he sent word through Mrs. Peel that Miss Voss was to come to the library. She came at 9 o'clock, as Mrs. Peel would have told her, and she stood in front of his desk with her hands clasped and her expression composed in exactly the way he had come to know, the calm of someone who has prepared for difficulty and is not going to be shaken by it. "Sit down, Miss Voss." She Saturday. She did not fidget. She looked at him with her dark eyes and waited. He had planned to begin with the silver. He had planned, in fact, to be methodical, to lay out what he had observed, to give her the opportunity to explain, and to maintain throughout the formal distance of an employer conducting an inquiry. He had a speech prepared. It was a good speech. It was precise and fair and entirely without the word vigilant. He looked at her and said, instead, "How long has your brother been in the workhouse?" The composure did not break. But beneath it, he saw it, the way you see something move beneath the surface of a very still lake. Something shifted. A drawing in. A brief, involuntary closing of the eyes that lasted less than a second and that she brought back under control with a visible, private act of will. "Your Grace, I followed you last night," he said. "I want you to know that is not a defensible thing to have done. I followed you because I had formed a suspicion that I did not believe and could not account for, and I intended to disprove it, and instead," he stopped. He was not, by nature, a man who left sentences unfinished. He finished this one. "Instead, I watched you give your brother the silver card tray from the second-floor parlor, and I need you to tell me why." The silence had a texture to it. "I can have the tray returned," Clara said. Her voice was exactly as steady as it always was, and Edmund found himself, irrationally, wishing it weren't. "I should not have taken it. I knew that when I took it, and I knew it was wrong. I will return it, and I will leave your employment this morning if that is your preference, and you will have whatever references you see fit to provide." "I asked you a question," Edmund said. "Why?" She looked at him. He looked at her. Outside, the October wind moved through the kitchen garden. "My brother is 15, she said. "He has been in the Millbridge workhouse for 8 months. I send him money and food when I can. The workhouse permits him correspondence on Wednesday afternoons, which is why," she stopped. Resumed. The workhouse master has made it clear that a sufficient sum paid before the end of November would secure his release into an apprenticeship with a saddler in Taunton. The saddler is a good man. I have made inquiries. The sum required is £12. Edmund said nothing. I have saved 9. The tray. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was wrong when I took it, and I knew it this morning, and I know it now. But I have been. She pressed her lips together briefly, and that one small gesture, the only concession to the immensity of what was beneath it, cost him more than the speech he had prepared. I have been running out of time. The fire in the grate made a small sound. Why? Edmund said, and his voice had changed, though he could not have described how. Is your brother in the workhouse? Another silence. This one was different, not the silence of someone calculating, but of someone deciding whether to be honest with a person they have no particular reason to trust. Our father died 2 years ago, Clara said. There were debts. The house was sold. I found employment, but Thomas, my brother, he was 13, and I could not take him with me to Bath, and there was no one else. Our mother has been dead since he was 7. She looked at her hands, then back at him. I send what I can. I was sending enough until 2 months ago, when the Bath family relocated to France and took only their French staff. The position here it was the only one available in time. I took it because it paid more than the last, and because Ashworth is 20 miles closer to Millbridge than Bath was. She paused. I should not have taken the tray. You should not, Edmund agreed. I will make restitution. You will not need to. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has learned not to expect things and therefore hears offers as either mistakes or traps. Your Grace. The £12. He said it flatly, because flatness was the only register in which he could say it without revealing that he had been sitting in this library for 2 hours thinking about a boy in a too large coat and a young woman who had arranged her entire life around a Wednesday afternoon. It is not a gift. It is an advance against your wages. You will remain in my employment, and the sum will be deducted over time, as you prefer. Clara did not speak. The tray, he continued, was damaged when I reviewed the parlor last week. A crack in the base. I believe it is already in the silver repair record. He looked at her steadily. You can confirm this with Mrs. Peel. That is not true, Clara said. No, it is not. The word why was in her expression. She did not say it aloud. She was not the sort of person who said the thing that would place someone in a position of vulnerability. She had noticed, in 6 weeks, that he was not the sort of person who invited that, and she was careful with what she noticed. But she asked it with her eyes. Edmund did not answer it. He was not yet sure he could. The situation with your brother, he said instead. The workhouse. I have some acquaintance with the Millbridge board. I can make inquiries about conditions. He paused. If that would be of use. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then something in her face, not the composure, which remained, but something beneath it, changed. Not warmth, exactly. Not gratitude, which was too soft a word for what he saw. Something more like the expression of a person who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has been offered, not relief, but the possibility of relief, which is a different and in some ways more devastating thing. It would, she said. He wrote to the Millbridge board that afternoon. He did not tell Clara he had done so. He was not sure why, except that the letter required him to use language he did not normally use, words like concern and welfare, and I would consider it a personal favor. And something about writing it in Clara's knowledge felt too much like showing her something he had not yet identified. Thomas Voss was released from Millbridge Workhouse on the 1st of November. Edmund arranged it through a solicitor, and the solicitor made the arrangement with the saddler in Taunton, and the sum involved was not £12 but considerably more, the kind of sum that bought an apprenticeship and a room above the saddler's shop and a new coat that fit, though he had no way of knowing about the coat and told himself he had not thought about it. He told Mrs. Peel to inform Miss Voss. He was in the library when Clara came. She did not knock, which was unlike her. The door opened, and she stood in the doorway with her hands at her sides and her eyes brilliant in a way he had not seen and could not look away from. And she said, simply and entirely without the composure she usually wore like armor, "You didn't have to do that. I'm aware. The arrangement, the saddler, That is more than an advance against wages. It is. She looked at him. He looked at her. The fire behind him crackled. Why? She asked. It was the question she had not asked before, and she asked it now without the caution she had used before, which meant she was asking it truly. Edmund set down his pen. He had been thinking about this for 2 weeks, since the night in the East Corridor when he had watched her hold her brother in the dark and had understood, with the unpleasant clarity of a man forced to see himself accurately, that the person he had been watching all those weeks was not a suspect or a mystery or an interesting case. She was a woman who had arranged her entire existence around a love so ordinary and so total that it had never occurred to her to explain it or perform it for anyone's benefit. She had simply done the next necessary thing, and the next, until the next necessary thing had been wrong and she had done it anyway. He had been thinking about what it was like to know, without a moment's question or ambiguity, what the most important thing in your life was. He had not known that in a long time. He was not sure he had ever known it. Because, he said, I have been looking for evidence that you were something other than what you are, and it was a stupid endeavor, and I owe you a debt for it. You owe me nothing. You were doing what any responsible employer would. I was doing something considerably less rational than that, Edmund said, and I think you know it. The silence was different again. The fire was very warm. Outside the window the November garden was grey and still. Clara said, I was going to return the tray. I know. And I was going to repay the 3 shillings I borrowed from the kitchen fund in September, before you say anything. I wasn't going to say anything. And I wrote down every penny I've taken from the household accounts for Thomas's food. I kept a record. It's in my room. You can review it at any. Clara, he said. She stopped. He had not called her by her name before. The word sat in the room between them with a weight that startled him slightly. He had not intended it to have weight. He was not sure, now that he had said it, how to proceed without acknowledging that it did. You don't have to account for yourself, he said. Not to me. She looked at him with the expression of someone for whom this was a new and slightly alarming idea. I have, she said, carefully, been accounting for myself to everyone for a very long time. I know. It is, she stopped. Tried again. It is a difficult habit to put down. I imagine it is. They looked at each other. Edmund was aware that he was in uncertain territory, the kind of territory that required either retreat or honesty, and that he was not, at 4-1, constitutionally suited to either. He was also aware, had been aware, in an increasingly inconvenient way, for some weeks, that this young woman with her composed face and her meticulous ledgers and her Wednesdays arranged around a boy in a workhouse was the most genuinely interesting person he had encountered in several years, and that this awareness had long since stopped being the observation of an employer. My wife died 4 years ago, he said. It came out slightly differently than he'd intended, not as preamble but as its own statement. It was not a happy marriage. I say that not to seek your sympathy but because, he stopped, found the thread again. Because I have been conducting myself since then as though the only appropriate response to the world is to observe it from a sufficient distance that it cannot do any further damage. And watching you. Another stop. You don't do that. You are entirely in it. Every part of you is engaged in the actual business of living, even when that business is very difficult, and I have found that. He had run out of words. This almost never happened. Clara said, quietly. You followed me because you were afraid of what you'd been feeling. He looked at her. I'm not reproaching you, she said. I understand the impulse. When something starts to matter, it becomes something you can lose. He was quiet for a moment. That is, he exhaled. Infuriatingly accurate. For the first time in 6 weeks, and he had been waiting for it, he realized, without knowing he was waiting, she smiled. Not the small, professional curve she used for Mrs. Peel's scrutiny or the Duke's formal correspondence. A real smile, sudden and slightly rueful and briefly brilliant, and she pressed her fingers to her mouth as though to contain it, which only made it worse. Infuriatingly, she repeated. You may look vindicated, Miss Voss. You've earned it. I am trying very hard not to. You're failing. Yes, she agreed. I'm afraid I am. Edmund asked her, 2 weeks later, if she would accompany him to Taunton to visit Thomas. He asked her formally, with appropriate protocol, Mrs. Peel as chaperone, a letter sent ahead to the saddler, all the machinery of propriety deployed in the service of something that propriety had not, in his experience, been designed to accommodate. Clara accepted with the same formality, and if her eyes were doing the slightly brilliant thing again when she agreed, he had learned to receive that without responding in ways that were difficult to take back. Taunton was 2 hours by carriage. They did not speak about feelings for the entire journey, which was both cowardly and correct, and which meant that 2 hours of very careful conversation about topics including the weather, Thomas's apprenticeship, the structural concerns of Ashworth Hall's north wing, and whether Mrs. Peel had been born disapproving or had developed it as a cultivated skill, served as the longest and most elaborate act of restraint Edmund could remember undertaking since his time in Parliament. Thomas Voss was indeed wearing a coat that fit. He was also, apparently, the sort of 15-year-old who had inherited his sister's absolute refusal to perform for an audience, which meant he shook Edmund's hand with perfect composure and said, "Clara says you're not as frightening as you look," which earned him a sharp look from Clara and an expression from Edmund that had not crossed his face in approximately 4 years. "I have been told," Edmund said, "that I am less frightening when I am not conducting surveillance." "He knows about that," Clara said to Thomas, who glanced between them with the particular acuity of a younger sibling who has understood a situation faster than anyone would prefer. "Right," Thomas said, filing the information carefully. "Well, thank you for the coat, Your Grace." "You're welcome." "And the room above the shop. And the 3-year arrangement with Mr. Holt." "You're welcome." Clara cried when she found out. "She'll deny that." "Thomas." "She did," Thomas said, with the serenity of someone who has stored this information for future use and deployed it at exactly the right moment. Edmund did not look at Clara directly. He was, however, peripherally aware of the color that had risen in her face and the expression she was turning on her brother, which was love and exasperation in such equal measure that it was almost painful to see. "We should," she said, with great dignity, "go inside." On the carriage ride back, with Mrs. Peel asleep against the window, she always fell asleep in carriages, which was either a fortunate coincidence or a deliberate professional choice. They sat in the particular quiet of people who have run out of safe subjects. Edmund said, "He's a good boy." "He is," Clara said. "He's too clever for his own good and he has no sense of what to do with that cleverness except use it to embarrass me. But yes, he's a good boy. That will sort itself out." "I'm told that." I remain unconvinced. A silence that was not uncomfortable. "Miss Voss," Edmund said. "Yes, Your Grace." "I am aware," he said, choosing each word with the care of a man who has spent a long time not saying things and is finding, to his own inconvenience, that he no longer wishes to continue not saying them. "That there are considerable obstacles to anything I might wish to." He stopped. Started again. "I am not an easy man." "No," Clara agreed, without cruelty or softness. "You're not. I am also 41 years old, which is 17 years more than I am. Yes, I am capable of arithmetic. And a duke, which creates certain complications. Yes, I was going to say expectations, but complications is also accurate." She looked at him. He looked at her. "You are," he said, "the only person in recent memory who has been honest with me without wanting something from it, and I find I have developed." He stopped at the inadequacy of the word developed. "I have come to regard you." "Edmund," she said. He stopped. She had not used his name before. The word, in her voice, was so simple and so direct that it dismantled everything he had been building toward. "You don't have to construct a case," she said. "You're not in Parliament." He exhaled. "Old habits. Tell me the thing itself." He looked at her for a long moment. Mrs. Peel snored softly against the window. The countryside moved past in the grey November light. "I am," he said, "very much in love with you. I am aware of the problems this creates. I intend, if you will permit me, to address them methodically and without putting any pressure on you two." "Yes," Clara said. He stopped. "I'm sorry." "Yes," she said again, with the composure that was not, he now knew, the absence of feeling but its very precise containment. Not to the addressing them methodically part, which will take time and is complicated, and I understand that. Just to the other part. He looked at her. She looked at him. Something in his chest that had been sitting at a particular sharp angle for 4 years shifted, almost imperceptibly, into a different position. "You are very direct," he said. "I have been accused of that before. I found it alarming initially. I remember. I find it considerably less alarming now." "I know," she said, and her mouth curved, that same sudden, real smile, and this time she did not press her fingers to it. He reached across the space between them and covered her hand with his. It was a gesture of extraordinary restraint and quite sufficient communication. She turned her hand over and held on. Outside, Ashworth was 20 miles away. Ahead, everything was undecided and uncertain and full of the specific complications of class and expectation and two people who had spent most of their lives learning to make themselves smaller than they were. For now, the carriage moved through the November grey, and Mrs. Peel slept, and neither of them said anything else, because the thing itself had been said, and it was enough. Edmund did, in the end, address the complications methodically. There were conversations with solicitors and extended family and the particular machinery of a society that had rules about such things, and those conversations took time. Neither of them pretended otherwise. But the complications were architecture built around a foundation that had already been decided in a carriage in November, and architecture, however elaborate, does not change what holds it up. Clara Voss became the Duchess of Ashworth on a Tuesday in March, which she had always said was an unlucky day. She was wrong about that. Thomas Voss became a saddler of some distinction, and spent the rest of his life embarrassing his sister at family gatherings, which he considered both his right and his vocation. The silver card tray was returned to the second-floor parlor. Edmund had it repaired, genuinely. There was indeed a small crack in the base, found only when he looked for it. He never told anyone that. He told Clara. She looked at him with that composed face of hers and the brilliant eyes, and said, "You went looking for it." "Yes," he said. "Why?" "Because," he said, "I wanted to be able to tell you that the record was true." She was quiet for a moment. "You are," she said, "a great deal more than you think you are." He had no response to that. He was not, yet, practiced in receiving the truth when it arrived without armor. He was learning. Have you ever protected someone so quietly that no one even knew you were doing it? What does it cost to carry something alone? Comment below with one of these words. Wednesday, if you've ever arranged your whole life around someone else's safety. The tray, if you've ever done something wrong for the most right reason. Coat that fits, if someone once took care of you in a way you never forgot. Share this story with someone who has ever given up comfort for someone they love. They'll understand every word of it. Subscribe if you want more stories where the real love isn't the dramatic declaration, but the 1,000 quiet choices made before anyone's watching. The question that stays. We spend so much time hiding our burdens so we won't be a weight to others. But what if the people around us wanted to carry some of it, and we never gave them the chance?